You know, there are some public meltdowns that are so long and so shocking, you just have to ask, how did it get this bad? Today we're talking about the story of Andy Dick. If you were around in the 90s, you couldn't miss him. He was everywhere. But a recent, really shocking event just brought his entire tragic story into sharp focus, and it forces us all to ask, what on earth happened?
So this is the scene. It unfolds on a Los Angeles street not too long ago. A video surfaces and you see Andy Dick just slumped over, completely unresponsive. People are rushing to help him, you can hear the panic in their voices, and someone's yelling for Narcan, the drug that reverses opioid overdoses. He did survive, but wow, that footage is just a brutal gut punch of a snapshot of a life in total freefall.
And it really leaves us with this one heavy question, right? How does a comedian who reached the absolute heights of Hollywood fame end up right here, unconscious on a sidewalk, needing strangers to literally save his life? It's a long, long way down.
To even begin to get a handle on that moment, we have to rewind. We have to go all the way back to the beginning to trace this path of self-destruction that's gone on for decades.
And here's the thing, Andy Dick's career started with so much promise. I mean, he trained at the Second City in Chicago. That is the legendary comedy troupe that gave us titans like Chris Farley and Bill Murray. It's like the Harvard of comedy. He had the pedigree, he had the talent, he was totally set up for a massive career.
And for a while there, man, he was everywhere. You can see his rapid ascent right here. In '92, he's on the cult classic Ben Stiller Show. Then he stars in a Get Smart remake. But his big break, the role that really made him a household name, was as Matthew Brock on the amazing sitcom News Radio, working alongside people like Phil Hartman. By the early 2000s, he even had his own hit show on MTV. The guy was a bona fide star.
But you know how these stories often go. Behind that goofy, quirky, on-screen persona, a much darker story was developing. As his fame got bigger and bigger, so did his dependence on drugs and alcohol. And this is where the story starts to take a really tragic turn.
And look, this wasn't just some private battle he was fighting behind closed doors. In a shockingly short period of time, his substance abuse became tangled up with the deaths of several of his close friends and colleagues. It casts this huge shadow over his life that, honestly, has followed him ever since. First, there was Chris Farley, the comedy legend. The story goes that Farley was actually Andy Dick's sponsor in Alcoholics Anonymous. Think about that for a second. The person meant to be his guide, his lifeline out of addiction. Well, in a terrible, tragic twist, Farley himself relapsed and died of a drug overdose in 1997. The man trying to save him was consumed by the very same disease.
Just months later came a tragedy it's just almost unbelievable. At a Christmas party, Dick gave cocaine to Bryn Hartman, the wife of his News Radio co-star, the brilliant Phil Hartman. Here's the thing, Bryn was a recovering addict. She'd been sober for 10 years. This act triggered her relapse, and 5 months later, she shot and killed Phil Hartman, then took her own life.
Then, less than a year after that, it happened again. Dick went on a 3-day party bender in Las Vegas with another actor, David Strickland. At the end of it all, Strickland hanged himself in his motel room. And it was Andy Dick who had to go and identify his friend's body.
So let's just process that. 3 devastating losses in just over a year, all of them connected in some way to his behavior and substance use. This period was a clear turning point. You can see his personal struggles just spiraling out of control and turning into this public spectacle of real, tangible harm.
And what followed was just a relentless, decades-long pattern of arrests, public meltdowns, and increasingly serious allegations. It completely alienated him from his friends, from his family, and from the very industry that made him famous in the first place.
And to give you a sense of the scale of his struggle, look at this number, 20. By 2016, Dick reported that he had been to drug rehabilitation programs 20 times. I mean, just think about that. 20 separate attempts to get clean. It just highlights an addiction that seemed completely and tragically impossible for him to overcome. And this table just illustrates the escalation perfectly. His legal troubles start in 1999 with a DUI and some possession charges. But over the years, the charges get way more serious. They shift to multiple accusations of sexual battery. And, of course, the consequences get worse too, from probation to jail time and eventually being ordered to register as a sex offender. It's just a clear, destructive, downward spiral.
And alongside the arrests were the constant public controversies. I mean, the list is wild.
He groped Pamela Anderson during her own televised roast. He was physically dragged off the set of Jimmy Kimmel Live for repeatedly touching Ivanka Trump. His feud with his old co-star John Lovitz over Phil Hartman's death actually turned into a physical fight, and by 2017 he was getting fired from multiple films for sexual harassment.
So at this point, you can imagine he was effectively unemployable in mainstream Hollywood. The industry that had celebrated him now saw him as a toxic liability. But his need for an audience, and let's be real, an income, didn't just disappear. So his career took another and honestly even more bizarre turn.
This is what led him into the chaotic world of in real life, or IRL streaming. It's basically a subculture where streamers just broadcast their lives, often with zero filter, for online donations from viewers. For Andy Dick, this meant his chaotic, intoxicated, and often disorderly life became the product. Viewers could tune in and watch the collapse happen in real time, effectively paying to witness the drama as it unfolded. There were no producers, no script, just raw, unfiltered dysfunction being broadcast for cash.
So the line between performance and reality, it just completely dissolved. And the climax of this whole era came in May 2022. He was living in an RV with other streamers, and he was accused of sexual battery. His subsequent arrest by the Orange County Sheriff's Department was captured and broadcast to his viewers live on stream.
Which brings us right back to where we started, that tragic scene on the sidewalk. When you look at the entire timeline, the early fame, the crushing tragedies, the decades of addiction, the long list of harm he's caused, and this final pivot to live streaming his own downfall, it forces you to ask a really tough question. Is this just a story of one man's failed personal responsibility? Or does it also say something about a system, in Hollywood, in our legal system, and yeah, in our online culture, that failed to intervene until it was far, far too late? Maybe, like always, the answer is somewhere in the middle.